For Robert Towne, writer of what plenty of people consider the greatest screenplay of all time, Chinatown wasn't necessarily a place. It was a state of mind.
Walsh, just listen to me for a second. You love this.
More specifically, it was a realization that no matter what you do, there were usually greater forces beyond your control working to dismantle whatever you've already accomplished or set out to do. The writer got this idea from a vice cop he'd once met, who told Towne he was working in the Chinatown district of Los Angeles. Towne was curious, asked him what he did there. Nothing is what the cop told him. When Towne inquired further, the cop told him that the people of Chinatown had their own language, their own way of doing things. The cops couldn't tell if they were helping prevent a crime or help commit one.
I don't think I need a day or two. You're dumber than you think I think you are. Not only that, but I wouldn't extort a nickel from my worst enemy, Escobar. That's where I draw the line.
So they basically did nothing. Let the people police it themselves. This notion struck a chord in the writer. Combined with a yearning to revisit the city he loved so much back in its simpler days, Towne conjured up a story for what would eventually become a classic, a film that still sits in the pantheon of greatest movies ever produced. Naturally, it would take a lot of hard work, a bit of fighting, and some very unscrupulous behavior to get it there. So lower the Venetian blinds.
Can't eat the Venetian blinds. I just had them installed on Wednesday.
Grab a stiff drink, because you're gonna find out what the happened to this movie. It was the early 1970s, and Robert Towne was crafting a reputation for being one of Hollywood's most talented screenwriters. He'd done some script doctoring work on great films like Bonnie and Clyde and The Godfather, and his screenplay for The Last Detail was being turned into a film starring Jack Nicholson. It would eventually get Towne a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination.
You try it and I'll call the Shore Patrol.
I am the Shore Patrol, mother. I am the mother Shore Patrol. Now give this man a beer.
Towne and Jack were very good friends, former roommates, and the writer wanted to write more movies for his good buddy. He pictured Jack as one of those classic private eye characters that the great old mystery writers would pen potboilers about, and he decided he'd set his mind to concocting a detective story set in the Los Angeles of the 1930s, an LA that, to his eyes, had ceased to exist. Inspired by an article in a magazine called Raymond Chandler's LA, name dropping perhaps the most famous of those old detective story writers, Towne noted one could easily make a period piece in the city if using the right locations. And so off he went, down a rabbit hole and into a story that revolved around one man's attempt to bring down corruption in the City of Angels.
No bribes.
Okay, you win. From now on, we'll stick to smuggling heroin.
See that you do.
Naturally, private detective Jake Gittes ultimately finds that the corrupt always win. Innocence is usually lost, and one man with a small set of ideals is powerless to do much in the face of those unfair facts.
You sure this is okay?
Curly, do you know how long I've been in this business?
The original draft took almost a year to write and was said to be somewhere around 180 pages long when completed. Considerably long, since most scripts run in the neighborhood of 100 to 120 pages. He delivered it to producer Robert Evans at Paramount, who loved the idea and the title. Problem was, it was very convoluted, and plenty of people couldn't make heads or tails out of it. That said, with Jack Nicholson already heavily invested, and the appeal of working with a big screenwriter too alluring to ignore, Evans agreed to give the project the green light, even though the studio bosses thought he was crazy to do so.
Oh, this movie's too complicated. Who's that guy? What did that guy say when I said, who's that guy?
To direct, Evans thought of Roman Polanski, who the producer imagined would give the movie a European atmosphere. Polanski was overseas, still grieving the loss of his beloved Sharon Tate, and making a strange and ultimately successful film called What? Polanski was a big name a few years prior thanks to Rosemary's Baby, but the death of Tate had sent him into a tailspin of grief. Would he really want to go back to the scene of the crime, Los Angeles, to make a Hollywood project when he was so much more comfortable in Europe? But Polanski had wanted to work with Nicholson and vice versa, so he eventually agreed to head back to the States to take on the challenge of deciphering Towne's epic script. Polanski, a writer himself, went about cutting many of Towne's subplots to the writer's dismay. The two worked together, or tried to, basically gutting the script and putting it back together piece by piece, deconstructing it page by page, line by line.
Well, I didn't ask to get made. I didn't ask to be torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some
Some little monster!
This took many weeks, sometimes 10 hours a day, with the two often butting heads furiously. One of the most contentious issues was the film's ending, and obviously here's where we put in a spoiler alert for those of you who haven't experienced Chinatown. Town's script originally ended with a traumatized Evelyn Mulray killing her corrupt father, Noah Cross, who, in addition to being a ruthless businessman scamming the entire city out of water, is also revealed to be the father of his own daughter's child. Not necessarily a happy ending, but one in which evil is at least punished. Polanski hated this. After having suffered the loss of Tate, Polanski saw reality as a dark, uncompromising place. No room for positive endings, the film should conclude with Evelyn dead and Noah Cross victorious. The film's famous final line,
"Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown,"
would perfectly sum up what was at the heart of Town's original vision. Chinatown is a place where the rules don't make sense, and there's nothing you can do about it. The finale literally takes place in Chinatown, which was not a part of Town's original vision, but Polanski thought it made sense to give the audience at least one scene set in the neighborhood. And what better time than at the tragic finale? Years later, Town would concede that Polanski was right about the downbeat ending. When the script was ready, or close enough to being so, the time came to cast the film's pivotal role opposite Nicholson, that of damaged heiress Evelyn Mulray. Jane Fonda was originally on Town's mind when he wrote the role, while Evans pictured his wife, Ally McGraw. Polanski and Nicholson wanted Faye Dunaway, still a big name in the business, but a slightly faded star after she exploded onto the scene with Bonnie and Clyde about 6 years earlier.
Shoot, I knew you never robbed the place, you faker.
She was hesitant to take the role because it wasn't the studio courting her, it was Jack, but she ultimately agreed. Polanski may have gotten the actress he wanted, but he soon found out that Dunaway was no pushover, with a reputation for being difficult, and the two reportedly had several intense arguments over the course of shooting.
I think there's been some misunderstanding here. There's no point in getting tough with me.
I don't get tough with anyone, Mr. Gittes. My lawyer does.
One infamous story sees Polanski, frustrated by how one of Dunaway's stray hairs was sticking up during a shot and distracting him, went over to the actress and plucked it right out of her head, shocking her completely and causing her to storm off the set. Eventually, a meeting at the studio between the two had to be set up in order to strike up a tenuous truce. A far more startling story contends that one day Polanski would not let Dunaway leave the set to use the bathroom while they were getting ready to shoot. The director, known for being a very stern taskmaster, would often yell at the actress, making her quite uncomfortable. And at that point, she'd apparently had enough. When Polanski approached her to talk about the shot, she threw a coffee cup of something in his face, and it wasn't coffee. Dunaway had apparently relieved herself into that very cup.
You'd keep your mouth shut if you knew it was good for you, buddy.
An incredulous Polanski called her a word we are absolutely not going to say here.
What did my son say, Mr. Mackey? Did he say the S word?
No, it was worse than that.
The F word?
Well, here's a short list of the things they've been saying, okay?
This could be one of those too crazy it's gotta be true Hollywood stories you hear, especially from the 70s when people weren't living in fear of their exploits being leaked, pun intended, to the press. While the story may or may not be true, there's no doubt Dunaway did not enjoy the experience of working with the Polish director. She would later confess she felt consistently humiliated by Polanski and pointed to his, quote, incessant cruelty and sarcasm as the main culprits behind their frosty relationship. As far as we know, he's the only person she's reportedly tossed urine at in a fit of anger. Even though Polanski and Nicholson were friendly, the two often got into it as well. One day, Jack refused to leave his trailer because he was watching a Lakers game. Jack, of course, being one of the most famous Lakers fans out there, wanting to see the final moments of the game. Polanski, fed up, stormed into the actor's trailer and attempted to break the TV with a mop. When that didn't work, he picked it up and tossed it out of the door, smashing it to bits. Nicholson barged off set, and depending on who you hear the tale from, he did so completely naked. So crazy it's gotta be true, right? Adding to the tension between the two was the famous scene where Polanski cameos as a hood hired by the villain to intimidate Nicholson's character. Though the switchblade the character sticks in Nicholson's nostril was a prop, it was still sharp, apparently designed by Polanski himself. As the menacingly diminutive character fiddles with the knife before jabbing it into Jack's nose, you can tell Nicholson looks genuinely alarmed. Well, that's because if Roman had the knife pointing the wrong way, Jack's nose would actually get sliced the way Jake's does. As it happens, Jack ended up fine, even as the blood spurting out of his nose looks awfully convincing. In the years since, Jack and Roman would joke, often with straight faces, that what the audience saw was real, that it was Jack's blood actually spilt in the name of art.
So, how long is this gonna take?
You can't rush art.
Polanski seemed to get into it with the crew as well. The original cinematographer, Stanley Cortez, a legend who'd shot movies like The Magnificent Ambersons and The Night of the Hunter, was fired after a couple weeks because of his slow pace of work, in addition to disagreements with Polanski over basic things like composition. And as for screenwriter Robert Towne, he wasn't even allowed on the set, so contentious had their relationship become. He would watch the dailies with producer Bob Evans. Towne reportedly disliked what he saw, criticizing everything. Polanski had taken his once great script and ruined it. He was sure it was going to be a disaster.
It's a disaster!
One problem during the post-production phase was the score, by a little-known composer named Philip Lambro. According to Towne, the score was an abomination, and when Evans heard it, he tossed it immediately.
Get that crap out of here!
Jerry Goldsmith, known at the time for his work on movies like Planet of the Apes and Patton, came in with reportedly only 10 days to compose and record an entirely new score. He accomplished this impressive feat, and it's now regarded as an integral piece of Chinatown's success. It even earned him an Oscar nomination. Towne and Evans were there every day to supervise the recording, while Polanski had already moved on to direct an opera in Italy. The first real screening of the film took place in the early summer of 1974. Towne was sure the movie was going to be low. As soon as it ended, the chairman of Paramount, Barry Diller, turned to Towne and called it, quote, great, though the writer didn't believe him. Soon after, a journalist ran up to him and gushed over it. The reviews hit the following day, with everyone fawning over the film. The rest, as they say, is history.
What can I tell you, kid? You're right. When you're right, you're right. You're right.
Ultimately, Chinatown became a massive hit for Paramount, grossing around $29 million off a budget rumored to be around $6 million. It spent 6 weeks in the #1 spot during that summer. When Oscar time came around, the film was nominated for 11 awards, including Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Original Screenplay. It only won for Towne's screenplay, while The Godfather Part 2 walked away with Picture and Director. Towne had originally envisioned Chinatown as the first chapter in a trilogy. A sequel was planned in the mid-80s, with Jack reprising his role and Robert Evans playing a supporting part, but days before it was set to go into production, it was shut down thanks to various arguments between the principals. It was eventually made with Nicholson at the helm, and the two Jakes went on to be a costly flop.
Suck it! Okay. Suck it.
Needless to say, the planned third chapter in the trilogy, Gittes vs. Gittes, was scrapped. Perhaps it's for the best. The Two Jakes is a small footnote in film history, while its predecessor has left an indelible mark. Despite all the drama behind the scenes, all that matters is what's on the screen, and most would tell you the final result was worth all the turmoil. Decades later, Chinatown is still a bona fide American classic. Forget it, Jake? Not a chance.
Never.
Never.
That's what I thought.